Now, I have the honor of announcing our keynote speaker, Phil Zuckerman, who has spared no effort in making a very long journey from California to Berlin. Phil Zuckerman is professor of sociology and secular studies at Pitzer College in Claremont, California. He's author of many books, including Society Without God, Living the Secular Life, and What It Means to Be Moral. Dear Phil Zuckerman, we are delighted and honored to have you here, and we look forward to your keynote speech. This is your stage and your applause. Welcome.
Vielen Dank, glücklich zu sehen. Thank you so much. I just have to make sure I'm not dreaming, so let me. First, thank you to Deborah and Rolf and Agnieszka for welcoming me, inviting me, reaching out, and such nice emails, and here I am. It's a little strange. I have never spoken to a German humanist group. I usually speak to, in the United States, to humanists there. I'm not quite sure what you're expecting and what you want. It's a different context, different countries and different cultures. What we humanists are facing in the United States is different than what you are facing here in Germany. There's some similarities. So I will do my best. And I was thinking last night about humanism and conversation. You are active humanists here in Berlin, so I thought, well, what can I tell you that you don't already know, that you are already living? So one of the things that I notice, my wife and I, we used to live in Denmark, and when I was doing research there, I was interviewing Danes. And one of the things that always occurred was I would sit down to talk with them in an interview, and I would just want to get to know them a little bit. And I'd ask them a little bit about their work and their life. And at a certain point, I'd say, are you a Christian? And they'd say, yes, of course. And I'd say, what does that mean to you? And they'd say, well, it means be a good person, take care of the sick, take care of the poor, do your best, treat others nicely. And I'd say, okay. Do you believe in God? Well, I've never thought about it. And do you believe in Jesus? Well, I think he was a nice man. Right, but do you think his mother was a virgin? Oh, no. Nobody believes that anymore. So I'd say, so you're a Christian and you don't believe in Jesus, you don't know if you believe in God, that's right. But being a Christian to you means being a good person, taking care of the sick, the homeless, that's right. I said, well, that sounds to me like secular humanism. And they'd sort of say, oh, I don't know what that is. So we have a bit of a branding problem. And it's the same in the United States. If you tell people that you're a humanist, most people just scratch their head. They don't quite know what that means. And I find that many of them love the values and principles that guide us, but they don't really know how to articulate it. So I thought if I could do that, what would I want them to know? So I came up with my 4 key pillars that I think are at the heart of humanism, and I hope they resonate here as well. And again, I'm speaking at a time in the United States where strong, fanatical religion is on the march. It's very powerful. The numbers of strong religious people are shrinking, but the power of the strong religious is growing. And I'm sure when Trump is the next president, it's going to be even worse. But I don't want to get pessimistic. This is optimistic. But one thing I find is, and I don't know about it here in Germany, but in the United States, a lot of Americans, they're constantly saying, well, oh, thank you. Perfect. You read my mind. We do have psychic abilities. They're always saying that the United States is founded on the Bible, founded on Christian Judaic. And I always say to them, well, isn't democracy the most important characteristic of the United States? Isn't that what we are founded on? And then I say, yes. I say, well, number one, key principle of humanism, democracy. It is a humanist value. It is a humanist principle. It is articulated in no religious scriptures. Government by the consent of the governed. You won't find it in the Old Testament. You won't find it in the Talmud. You won't find it in the Sermon on the Mount or the New Testament or the Upanishads or the Hadith or the Quran or any Adi Granth Sahib. It's not articulated by any prophets, any angels, any gods, any deities. It simply comes from the brains and minds of human beings living, experiencing the world over the centuries and realizing this is the best way that we ought to organize ourselves. And I was happy to find in the Copenhagen Declaration on Democracy a humanist value, which was articulated at the Humanist International World Humanist Congress in Copenhagen in 2023, quote, "Democracy is a universal, fundamental value that is essential to the realization of humanist principles worldwide. We call on all governments, institutions, and individuals to uphold and protect democratic values as a cornerstone of human dignity, justice, and freedom." But you know, I'm a social scientist. I don't just stay in the philosophical stratosphere. And that principle, that humanist value of democracy, it's not just an ideology or a nice philosophy or an aspiration. It is also a lived reality. In nearly every historical instance, democracy has been championed and pushed by humanists. And is actually, time and time again, it is the more religious and the more conservative who fight against democracy, who resist it. And it is the humanists, the secularists, and the progressives who fight for it. Not always. There are some exceptions. Obviously, the atheists of the Soviet Union didn't do so well on the democratic front, or in China, or in Cambodia, but they were not humanists. They were atheists, and they did not fight for humanist values, quite the opposite. And that is why I say the overall historical trajectory is clear, that democracy flourishes when humanism is a strong cultural force, and vice versa. They go hand in hand, and they reinforce each other. And I was doing a little bit of reading, and I found out that in 1933, when Hitler outlawed the Deutsche Friedkeiner Verbund, it had 500,000 members. That's amazing. 500,000 members in 1933. Staggering. And democracy has succeeded in North America and in Europe against the might of religion and superstition, not because of them. And when we look at the world today, the challenges to democracy, Trumpism, Putinism, Modiism, Netanyahuism, Hamasism, in every instance, it is the strongly religious who support these anti-democratic fascists and demagogues, and it is the strongly secular who oppose them. In each case, the deeply pious, the deeply devout, the strongly religious, the theocrats support these brutal leaders, and it's the secular humanists who oppose them. For example, let's take my dictator, Trump. Right now, when asked who supports Trump and who thinks favorably of Trump, 67% of white evangelicals favorably support Trump. 51% of white Catholics. 45% of Hispanic Protestants, 35% of Muslims, but only 17% of agnostics and only 12% of atheists. In every demographic, when you take religion, race, class, it is the humanists who are the least supportive of Trump, and it is the more religious who are the most supportive. And we see the same thing in India with Modi, as he tries so hard to undo the secularism of Nehru. It is the strongly religious that support his Hindu nationalism, and it is the humanists who work against it. Same thing in Israel and Palestine, this horrible, horrible tragedy. In both cases, on both sides, it is the religious, the strong Orthodox fundamentalist Jews and the strong fundamentalist Muslims who pour kerosene into this fire, who add to it. And it is the strong secular humanists in both camps who want to see peace and mutual respect and dignity for both sides. It is the strongly secular in Israel who want to see a two-state solution, and it is the strongly secular in Palestine who are most open to that kind of a future. So, I think the world should know that we support democracy, democracy supports humanism. Secondly, and this again may be a US thing, but I'm always told that without religion, how can we be moral? I don't know if you get that question here in Germany. Maybe you've gotten past that. But I would argue that morality, this is the second pillar of humanism, I believe, is that our morality is simply based on empathy, compassion, and the alleviation of suffering. It's quite simple. I was just invited to a debate on YouTube last week, and I debated some philosopher, a Catholic philosopher in England, and he kept saying to me, "But you have no foundation. You have no foundation. I have a magical invisible deity that gives me my foundation. What is your foundation?" I said, empathy? What more do you need? Compassion. We don't like to see suffering. And I remember one night, my wife, man, this was before COVID, several years ago. My wife, my wife, and my 3 kids, we were visiting my folks who live in Santa Monica near the beach, and it's about an hour drive back to Claremont where we live. It was December, it was at night, and we were on the freeway going about 75 miles an hour. Suddenly, I saw all these brake lights in front of us. Something was happening, and we were in the fast lane. In the United States, when you're on the freeway, the slow lane is to the right, and then as you come closer to the middle, it gets faster and faster. So we were in the fastest lane. I slammed on my brakes because I thought something was happening, and a woman was dancing across the freeway, not in her right mind. And we just stopped as she came right in front of us. And she had somehow managed to get across 4 or 5 lanes on the Los Angeles freeway, and there she was in front of us. I didn't know if she was drunk or on drugs or having a mental breakdown or all 3. And then she climbed over the divider so that she was now facing the fast lane in the opposite direction. And my wife just shrieked, "Stop her, stop her." Thank you. And I got out of the car. My kids are in the car, and we're on the freeway, and I started to talk to this woman, and I somehow got her to come back over, and I got her into the car. And we were able to take her and get some help. Yay. Why? What was the oh, thank you, yes. Thank you. What was the foundation? We didn't want to see another human being suffer. We didn't want to see a living thing experience pain and suffering. It's very simple. And to me, this is what motivates us, and I don't think it needs any magical or mystical foundations to make sense. And I would argue that if you think your morality, or if you base your morality on something magical, I think that's a problem. I'll give you one example on the other direction. I was invited to a church to debate, and I went to this big church in Sacramento, and I had this debate, and afterwards this man came up to me. This is kind of a rough story, but you can handle it. You're all adults. And he said, "Zuckerman, you make some good points, but listen." He said, "You know, I love women." Okay? And he said, "The only thing that keeps me from raping women is I know God is watching me." And he said this proudly, like, "There you go, Zuckerman. How are you going to answer that?" And I said, "Well, clearly you don't love women." I guess we have a different understanding of love. But if another person's suffering doesn't stop you, and the only thing that stops you is this magic invisible eye in the sky, that's not morality. That's a problem. Oh, thank you. Democracy, a humanist value. Our morality simply based on empathy and compassion and not wanting to see other people suffer. And number 3, if I had to list it, I would say cosmopolitanism or universalism. And what do I mean by that? You know, Secular humanists, we tell a certain story about humanity, and so do my religious Americans. In the religious American version, we are all the children of some father deity. We are all God's children, okay? In my story, we are all evolved. We have the same primate ancestors. We share our DNA and our genetics with each other as primates, as Homo sapiens. And what's interesting to me, in both of these narratives, the idea is that we're all connected. Either we're all brothers and sisters to the same heavenly Father, or we are all the same species evolved from the same primate ancestors. And what is interesting is that when we look at the social science, it is actually the humanists who are much more cosmopolitan, much more seeing the unity of humanity than our religious peers. We understand the evolutionary oneness of humanity and, in fact, are much less likely to engage in us versus them thinking. Consider nationalism, ethnocentrism, patriotism. They tend to be strongest among the most religious and weakest among secular humanists. For example, the 2018 Pew study in Europe found that religious Europeans are significantly more nationalistic, more anti-immigrant, more ethnocentric, more suspicious of Jews and Muslims than secular humanist Europeans. And in the United States, when Americans are asked, is the United States the greatest country in the world? I mean, that's obvious. How strongly do you agree? The most religious say yes, the United States is the greatest country in the world, and the most secular and humanist are the least likely to say that. And I just keep having to emphasize this because people don't see it that way where I'm from. But in fact, we are much more likely to see the oneness of humanity and to act on that worldview. And this is across the United States, but we see it in India, Myanmar, Russia, Iran, Nepal, the former Yugoslavia, Japan, Turkey, Greece, Pakistan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In country after country after country, strong nationalism and strong religiosity go hand in hand, and more universalism and cosmopolitanism go more hand in hand with secular humanism. Let me give you, for example, in the United States, a recent study. Americans were told that by the year 2043, people of color will outnumber whites in the United States. What do you think about that? Over half of white evangelicals said this would be bad news. 39% of mainline Protestants, this would be bad news. 32% of Catholics said this would be bad news. But the lowest percentage, at 23%, still not great, but still the lowest, was among secular humanists, who were the least likely of Americans to see this demographic shift in negative terms. And my favorite is the 2009 study by Duke University professor Deborah Hall, who did a meta-analysis of every study she could find, national samples on the relationship between religiosity and racism. And the fun thing about this study was she wanted to show how religion helps with fight racism. And what she found was, in her study of 55 studies, that in fact, atheists and agnostics exhibited the lowest levels of racism in the entire, in study after study after study. Tribalism is an overt hallmark of religion, especially the strong religious, but humanism prods us towards cosmopolitanism. Let me read from the Humanist Manifesto 2. Quote, "We deplore the division of humankind on nationalistic grounds. We have reached a turning point in human history where the best option is to transcend the limits of national sovereignty and to move toward the building of a world community in which all sectors of the human family can participate. Human progress, however, can no longer be achieved by focusing on one section of the world, Western or Eastern, developed or underdeveloped. No part of humankind can be isolated from any other. Each person's future is in some way linked to all. We thus reaffirm a commitment to the building of world community." You know, when I think about that great night on the, well, it wasn't a great night on the freeway. It actually was a very scary night. But when I think about that night, again, All that mattered was this was a living person or a living being capable of suffering. We didn't want to see anything happen to her. It didn't matter what her race was, what her gender was, what her sexual orientation was, what her religion was, what her nationality was. She wasn't carrying a flag. All we knew was she was a living being, a sentient being, capable of suffering. And it's that shared livingness that inspired us to help her. And that's at the heart of humanist universalism and cosmopolitanism. So democracy is a pillar of humanism. Morality based on empathy and compassion and nothing more is a pillar of humanism. And the third was that cosmopolitanism. And then finally, I would say what really characterizes us is what I would call a here and nowness. I suspect there's a German word that captures that, but I don't know what it is. Here and nowness. I think another major difference between humanists and religious people is that the former think there is some other world. My wife and I were at the Hamburger Bahnhof Museum yesterday. I don't know if you've been, but there was a great exhibit upstairs with videos. And in part of this video, there was a woman who was putting lots of ketchup and mustard on French fries and hot dogs. And she kept saying, in the next world, everyone will win. In the next world, everyone will be happy. In the next world, everyone will have endless ketchup and mustard. And I thought about this talk. We are not waiting for another world. We are not living for another world. We don't see this as just a dress rehearsal to some greater performance. We accept our mortality and the finiteness of our being. This world is all there is, as far as we know, and this life is all we will ever have. No heaven, no hell, no reincarnation, just this life, just the here and now. As my father would say in Yiddish, wir leben und streben in die Welt, nicht in jene. We live and strive in this world, not in some other world. Anything we wish to see or experience, justice, fairness, equality, joy, must be made manifest by us, by people. There are no magical solutions. We have to struggle, we have to work individually, collectively, over the course of our limited lives. That's it. There are no other options or solutions. And the world needs this orientation, right? Humanism is what is needed now. And the good news there is that it's surging. We are growing. Our numbers are growing. So what's important is that we connect these humanist values with the growing number of humanists out there who probably don't even know they are humanists. But if they knew, would definitely sign up. And all those Danes would say, yeah, I'm a humanist. Exactly. And if I look at some of the good things in the world, I thought, oh, there's a lot of bad, Trump and so on, and Putin, and horrible, horrible atrocities being committed by the Israelis in Gaza. I thought, let's think of some good ones. Oh, and of course, Dortmund lost to Real Madrid. I'm very sorry. That was probably the worst. A promising new malaria vaccine has been approved. The global infant mortality rate is the lowest it has ever been in recorded history. The world's largest solar energy farm was recently launched in the UAE. Spain became the first European country to introduce paid menstrual leave for women experiencing painful menstruations. And Mexico just elected a Jewish atheist woman for president. All of this is because of humanist values, right? They are partly, not completely responsible, but partly responsible for the good that is happening. Humanism represents the brightest lights that can help us resist some of the darker forces that are gathering in the world today. And the fact that we are growing gives me great hope. And to see such an organization like this is truly incredible. So I don't know if I did a half an hour, but let's stop there. And if there's more time, we can have questions or comments. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. What happens next? Thank you. Thank you, thank you.